These times aren't accidental, and they aren't just life happening to us. They are intentional, divine moments orchestrated by God. If you've ever found yourself wondering why everything seems to be working against you, why you feel stretched, overwhelmed, or burdened in ways you never thought possible, then you are not alone. This is no ordinary test, it's a sign. God is preparing you for something far greater than you could ever imagine. But here's the truth: He will only reveal your true calling after you've proven yourself in the fire of His tests. When God begins to call you into your purpose, He doesn't make it easy. The journey to fulfilling your calling is often paved with trials that seem almost unbearable. But the very fact that you are being tested is evidence that God is at work. One of the clearest signs that He is preparing you for your calling is the sudden intensification of the challenges you face. Every moment of confusion, every setback, and every painful experience is divinely crafted to mold you, shape you, and prepare you for the weight of your calling. Take a look at the life of Joseph. Here is a man who had dreams of greatness, dreams given to him by God. But before he could step into his calling, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. The journey from the pit to the palace wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. But every test that Joseph faced was necessary to prepare him for the responsibility of leadership. Joseph didn't know it at the time, but every trial was pushing him closer to his divine destiny. God tests us in seasons where it feels like the world is against us. These trials reveal more than just our patience or strength. They expose the core of who we are. Are we willing to trust Him when everything falls apart? Will we still pursue the calling when the road becomes dark and uncertain? This testing phase is where God filters out those who are merely curious from those who are truly committed to their calling. You may feel like you're fighting alone, but in truth, God is refining you. During these periods of testing, it's common to question whether you've heard God correctly. You may wonder if you misunderstood His call because the circumstances you're facing seem contradictory to the vision you were given. But this is the very essence of the test. Can you hold on to what God spoke when everything around you says otherwise? Can you remain steadfast when the dream seems further away than ever? In the wilderness, God will strip away everything that isn't aligned with your purpose. The story of Moses is another powerful example. After receiving a divine calling to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, tending sheep. This wasn't wasted time. God was shaping Moses' character, teaching him humility, and preparing him for the immense responsibility of leading a nation. Sometimes the delay you experience in stepping into your calling is actually a divine setup for growth. God will not allow you to enter your purpose prematurely. You may feel delayed, but it's not denial, it's preparation. In moments of testing, it's easy to focus on the discomfort, the pain, and the seeming unfairness of it all. But let me remind you, God does not waste pain. Every struggle is a seed planted in the soil of your future success. Every tear, every heartache, every moment of doubt is being used to build you into the person who can carry the weight of the calling He has placed on your life. This is why the testing is so intense, because the calling is so great. Look at Jesus. Before His ministry began, He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. The wilderness is a place of isolation, of hardship, and of testing. But it is in the wilderness where we are proven. It is in the wilderness where our identity is solidified and our dependence on God becomes unshakable. Jesus had to pass through the wilderness before He could step into His ministry. You too must pass through your own wilderness, where God strips away the comforts of life and challenges you to rely solely on Him. The wilderness isn't a punishment, it's a place of preparation. It's where God tests your faith, your perseverance, and your commitment to the calling He has placed on your life. The wilderness is the proving ground. And while it may feel like you're wandering aimlessly, God is leading you with a purpose. He is teaching you how to trust Him in the dry seasons so that you will be able to carry out your purpose in the seasons of abundance. Another clear sign that God is testing and preparing you for your calling is the feeling of isolation. You may find yourself losing relationships, being misunderstood, or walking a path that others don't seem to understand. This is intentional. God will often remove certain people and distractions from your life during times of preparation. The isolation is not meant to break you, but to help you hear His voice more clearly. It's in the solitude that God speaks to your spirit and gives you the clarity and wisdom you will need for the next phase of your journey. Look at David. Before he became king, he was anointed by God, but instead of immediately stepping into his role, he found himself on the run from Saul, hiding in caves and living in exile. But it was in those lonely places, in the caves of isolation, that David learned to trust God completely. He learned how to lead not just with his sword, but with his heart. The cave was not David's final destination, it was his classroom. You might feel like you're in your own cave right now, cut off from the world, facing battles on every side. But this is the place where God is doing His deepest work in you. He is molding your character, sharpening your vision, and preparing you for the weight of your calling. What you're experiencing is not punishment, it's the process. When you feel the pressure increase, when the trials seem to be coming from every angle, it's because you're closer to your calling than you realize. The enemy knows this, and he will do everything in his power to discourage you, distract you, and make you doubt the very promise that God has spoken over your life. But the pressure is a sign that God is getting ready to elevate you. Just as diamonds are formed under intense pressure, so too is your calling being shaped in the crucible of adversity. God will often test your faithfulness in the small things before He entrusts you with the big things. You may feel overlooked or undervalued in your current season, but understand this: God is watching how you handle the little assignments. Will you be faithful in obscurity? Will you serve with excellence even when no one is watching? This is part of the test. If you can be trusted in the small things, God will elevate you to greater responsibilities. God's tests are never without purpose. He is not trying to break you, but to build you. When the pressure mounts, when the isolation feels unbearable, when the tests seem never ending, remember this: God is preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine. His timing is perfect and His process is intentional. Trust the process. Trust the testing, because the moment you pass the test, you will step into the fullness of the calling that God has ordained for your life. And as the testing continues, something profound begins to happen. The very trials that once felt unbearable start to shape your perspective. You begin to see that every delay, every challenge, and every hardship was carefully designed to equip you for your calling. God's method of preparation is different from what we might expect. He doesn't just give us the end result. Instead, He takes us through a process that refines and reshapes us so that we're not just ready for our calling, but we are capable of sustaining it when it arrives. In the process of testing, God isn't just concerned with giving you what you desire. He is molding you into someone who can carry out the full responsibility of your destiny. This is where many people fall short. They see the testing as punishment or unfair treatment. But the truth is, the testing is the refining fire that burns away everything that would limit your potential or sabotage your calling. I think about gold. Before gold can truly shine, it must go through a purification process. The heat is turned up and the impurities are burned away. But the heat isn't there to destroy the gold, it's there to make it more valuable. In the same way, God is refining you through the heat of life's trials. The testing is purifying your heart, your motives, and your vision so that when you step into your calling, you will do so with purity and power. One of the greatest signs that God is preparing you for your calling is that the pressure will increase. The tests become more intense, the obstacles seem to grow larger, and the path becomes narrower. But this is not a sign of failure, it's a sign of growth. As God enlarges your capacity to handle more, He allows greater challenges to come your way. You see, God will never place you in a position where your character can't sustain you. If He has called you to a great work, He will ensure that your foundation is strong enough to hold it. Consider the life of the Apostle Paul. After his dramatic encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, Paul didn't immediately step into his ministry. Instead, he was led into a season of preparation, where God tested him and refined him for the monumental task of spreading the gospel to the Gentiles. Paul faced intense persecution, shipwrecks, imprisonment, and more. But every trial was preparing him for the depth and scope of his ministry. The trials didn't diminish Paul's calling, they solidified it. God's testing is always with a purpose. Sometimes he will allow you to face situations where you feel utterly inadequate. You might feel overwhelmed, unqualified, or like you're not enough for the task at hand. But this too is part of the preparation. God wants you to recognize that your calling isn't something you can fulfill in your own strength. The greater the call, the more dependent you must be on Him. It's in these moments of weakness that His strength becomes evident. His grace is sufficient, and His power is made perfect in your weakness, 2 Corinthians 12:9. As you go through the tests, you will notice that God often brings you to a point where you have no other option but to trust Him. The resources you once relied on, the people you once leaned on, and the comforts you once found solace in will be stripped away. This is intentional. God is bringing you to a place where your faith is fully anchored in Him alone. It is in these moments when you have nothing left but God that you truly understand the depth of your dependency on Him. Remember Elijah, who, after a great victory over the prophets of Baal, was led to a place of isolation by the brook Cherith. The brook eventually dried up, and Elijah was left without the provision he had relied on. But it was in this moment of desperation that God sent a widow to provide for him. The drying up of the brook wasn't a sign that God had abandoned Elijah, it was a test to deepen his faith. God was preparing Elijah for greater things, and in doing so, He had to remove the familiar to strengthen Elijah's reliance on divine provision. The same happens in your life. When God begins to strip away the things that you have depended on, it can feel as if you're being abandoned. But in truth, God is positioning you to rely fully on Him, because what lies ahead requires a faith that is unshakable. The calling on your life is too great for you to walk in your own strength. You must be fully yielded to the One who has called you, trusting that He will provide, guide, and sustain you every step of the way. Another crucial aspect of God's testing is the refining of your motives. As human beings, we often start with a vision or desire that may be noble, but as we journey through life, self-interest can creep in. Perhaps you start with a desire to serve, but over time, the allure of recognition or success begins to subtly shape your motives. God's test will expose these impurities. He will allow situations to arise where your true intentions are revealed, not to shame you, but to purify your heart. He wants you to walk in your calling with pure motives, driven by a heart that seeks His glory above all else. This is what happened to Peter. Before Jesus' crucifixion, Peter declared that he would never deny Christ. His intentions were noble, but when the moment of testing came, Peter denied Him 3 times. This wasn't the end of Peter's calling, but it was a necessary moment of refining. Jesus later restored Peter and gave him the charge to feed His sheep. But now Peter was different. He had been tested, humbled, and purified. His calling remained, but his character had been strengthened through the test. God does the same with us. He will test our hearts, our intentions, and our faithfulness. He will bring us to moments where we must choose between our comfort and our calling. The tests aren't designed to make us fail, they are designed to bring us to a place of deeper alignment with God's will. One of the most profound signs that God is testing and preparing you is that you will begin to see doors close that you thought would remain open. Opportunities that seemed perfect may suddenly vanish, relationships that once supported you may fall apart, and plans you meticulously crafted may unravel before your eyes. These closed doors aren't a sign of rejection, they are divine redirections. God sees what we cannot see. He knows that certain paths, while seemingly beneficial, would lead us away from His ultimate purpose for our lives. The closed doors are a test of your trust. Will you still follow Him when the path you planned no longer exists? When you face a closed door, instead of becoming frustrated or discouraged, recognize it for what it is, a sign that God is actively involved in your life, directing you towards something greater. The closed door is not the end of the journey. It's simply a redirection toward the true path God has for you. Remember, not every opportunity is God's opportunity for you. Sometimes He will close a door because He is protecting you from something you cannot see. Other times He closes a door because the timing isn't right. Either way, the closed door is a test of your faith and your willingness to trust His leading. God's testing and preparation process is not comfortable, but it is necessary. He is shaping you into someone who can handle the weight of the calling He has placed on your life. Just as a building needs a strong foundation before the structure can rise, so too does your calling require a foundation built on faith, trust, and obedience. As you continue walking through this season of testing, you must understand that God's preparation is holistic. It's not just about equipping you with the skills and abilities to carry out your calling. It's about transforming you into the person who can live out that calling in a way that reflects His character. This is where many people miss the deeper work God is doing. They think preparation is solely about developing talents or opportunities, but in reality, it's about the cultivation of character, integrity, and humility. God is less concerned with what you can do and more concerned with who you are becoming. The reason this character development is so crucial is that your calling will often place you in situations of influence and responsibility. Without the right character, the weight of the calling can crush you. Power, influence, and leadership, when given prematurely, can lead to pride, corruption, and spiritual failure. That's why God tests you in the hidden places, because it's in those places where your integrity is forged. When no one is watching, when you're not receiving recognition or praise, that's where God is testing your heart. In the Bible, we see this clearly in the life of David. Before he became king, David was a shepherd, tending sheep in the fields. It was a lonely, thankless job. There were no crowds cheering him on, no royal titles, just him, his flock, and the wilderness. But in that place of obscurity, God was shaping David into a man after His own heart. He was learning how to lead with compassion, how to protect the vulnerable, and how to trust God in the quiet moments of life. These lessons were critical because the same heart that guided him as a shepherd would later guide him as a king. In your life, God may have you in a season of obscurity right now, where it feels like your talents are being underutilized or your work is going unnoticed. But know this obscurity is a training ground. It's in the hidden places that God is preparing you for the visibility and influence that will come with your calling. He is testing your faithfulness when no one is applauding, because if you can serve with integrity in the small things, you will be able to handle the greater things when they come. Another significant part of God's testing process is teaching you how to handle rejection. As you move toward your calling, you will inevitably face opposition. People may misunderstand you, criticize you, or even actively work against you. This too is part of the preparation. God will allow you to experience rejection not to discourage you, but to build resilience and deepen your reliance on Him. When you understand that your validation comes from God and not from people, you become unshakable. Look at the life of Jesus. Throughout His ministry, Jesus faced constant rejection from the religious leaders, from His own townspeople, and even from His disciples at certain moments. Yet, He never allowed rejection to derail Him from His purpose. Why? Because He knew that His identity and mission were rooted in the will of His Father. Similarly, you must come to a place where you are so anchored in God's purpose for your life that rejection doesn't deter you. God is testing you in this area, because if you cannot handle rejection on a small scale, you won't be able to withstand it when your calling places you in more prominent positions of influence. Rejection often feels personal, but in many cases, it's simply a reflection of how deeply committed you are to walking in your divine purpose. People may reject you because they don't understand the vision God has placed in your heart. They may not see the bigger picture that He is leading you toward. But that's okay. God's preparation sometimes requires that you walk alone for a season, not because He wants you to be isolated, but because He is refining your ability to hear His voice above all others. God also tests your ability to wait. Patience is one of the most difficult virtues to cultivate, especially in a world that values instant gratification. But if you look at the biblical figures God used in mighty ways, you'll notice a common theme waiting. Abraham waited for the promise of Isaac. Joseph waited years in prison before stepping into his destiny. Moses waited in the desert for 40 years before leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Waiting isn't a waste of time, it's part of the process. During the wait, God is testing your trust in His timing. We often think we're ready for our calling long before we actually are. But God sees what we don't. He knows when the circumstances are right, when your heart is fully prepared, and when the impact of your calling will be most effective. The waiting season is not passive, it's active. It's a time when God is preparing the circumstances around you, and more importantly, working on your heart to ensure that when the moment comes, you are fully aligned with His will. In the waiting, God also teaches you how to handle delayed gratification. Many people give up on their calling because they can't endure the wait. They become frustrated or impatient, and they settle for something less than what God had planned for them. But the wait is where God develops the fruit of patience, which will be essential for sustaining your calling in the long run. If you can trust God in the waiting, you will be able to trust Him when the calling comes to fruition. Moreover, God's testing will often involve removing things from your life that are not aligned with your destiny. Sometimes this can feel like a loss. You may lose friendships, opportunities, or even material possessions. But in reality, God is pruning you for greater fruitfulness. Just as a gardener cuts away branches that are unfruitful or that hinder the growth of the plant, God will cut away anything in your life that could sabotage your calling. This pruning process is painful but necessary. Jesus spoke about this principle in John 15:2, where He said, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit He takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit He prunes. That it may bear more fruit." God's pruning is not rejection, it's preparation. He is removing the things that would hinder your growth so that you can be even more effective in your calling. Trust the pruning process, even when it feels like a loss, because God is setting you up for greater fruitfulness. One of the hardest parts of the testing process is when God challenges you to release something or someone you've been holding on to. Sometimes the very thing we are clinging to is the thing that's keeping us from stepping into our calling. It could be a relationship, a job, a habit, or even a mindset. God will bring you to a point where you have to choose between holding on to what's familiar or stepping into the unknown with Him. This is where faith is tested at its deepest level. Abraham was tested in this way when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, the very promise that God had given him. It was an ultimate test of faith. Was Abraham willing to trust God even when it meant letting go of the thing he loved most? This kind of testing reveals whether your heart is fully surrendered to God's will. Are you willing to release your own plans, dreams, or desires to follow God's leading? When you pass this test, God will not only restore what you gave up, but multiply it in ways you could never have imagined. God is preparing you to walk in a level of faith that transcends circumstances. This is why the testing is so intense, because the level of faith required to fulfill your calling is greater than what you currently possess. He's stretching you, pulling you out of your comfort zone, and asking you to trust Him in ways you never have before. This is not to harm you, but to grow you. Faith is like a muscle. It must be exercised and stretched to become stronger. The more God tests your faith, the more it grows, preparing you for the challenges and victories ahead. As the testing process continues, you'll begin to notice that your priorities start to shift. The things that once seemed so important, the accolades, the approval of others, the pursuit of success, begin to fade in comparison to the deep desire to fulfill God's purpose for your life. This is one of the most beautiful aspects of the preparation process. God is realigning your heart with His priorities. You'll find that what matters most is not the external success or recognition, but the internal alignment with God's will. God is preparing you not just to step into your calling, but to sustain it. He is testing your character, refining your motives, deepening your faith, and teaching you how to trust Him in every area of your life. Each test is a stepping stone toward the greater purpose He has for you. Trust the process, even when it's difficult. Keep your eyes fixed on Him. knowing that the very trials you face today are the preparation for the calling you will walk in tomorrow. In conclusion, the testing you face is not a sign of God's absence, but His preparation for the greatness He has destined for you. Each trial, delay, and closed door is His way of refining your character, strengthening your faith, and aligning your heart with His purpose. As you walk through this process, embrace the pruning, trust His timing, and surrender what you hold dear, knowing that God is preparing you for something far greater than you could ever imagine. May God bless you with the strength to endure, the wisdom to see His hand in every challenge, and the faith to step boldly into your calling when the time comes. Thank you for walking this journey of faith, trusting God's perfect will, and allowing Him to shape you for His glory and your ultimate purpose.